Welcome to Slayer the Alchemist, and on today's episode, why I've never been able to fully embrace death metal. I made a video not that long ago, my 5 favorite death metal bands, and it got a lot of comments like, you have no idea what you're talking about. You know, people saying this band isn't death metal, that band isn't death metal. And at the beginning of the video, I mentioned that I don't go deep with death metal. And I was honestly surprised at some of the comments because, and I guess this just shows how I don't go very deep with death metal, that I really don't understand where people were coming from with some of their comments. Usually when somebody leaves a comment that's contrary to something that I think or whatever, I can see where they're coming from. Even though I may not agree with them, I can see where they're coming from. With some of these, I just totally didn't understand. I was totally confused. And maybe this was my fault that I wasn't clear enough about the specific eras of these bands that I like. Like, for instance, Mastodon. A lot of people, Mastodon is not a death metal band. And I was surprised to hear people say that because, again, I'm thinking the first Mastodon out record, the early Mastodon stuff where they were singing in that, I thought it was a death metal style vocal, but apparently not. Now, I understand modern Mastodon, they have a lot more clean vocals in them. They're more of a progressive metal band. But I just didn't, I still kind of don't understand it. How is like the first Mastodon album not a death metal record? I don't know. Let me know in the comments. Explain it to me nicely. Please, I'm asking this as a friend, asking for a friend. The other one was Behemoth. And I thought I mentioned that Behemoth, I was aware that they started off as more of a black metal band. But when I listened to the most recent Behemoth record, how is that not death metal? Asking for a friend. Leave a comment down below. So, and I mentioned in that video that I would maybe make a video about why I've never been able to fully embrace death metal. Someone just left a comment like, I hope you make that video. So I thought, all right, I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to jump into this and do this. All right, so part of it is when death metal was happening, I talk about this on here, my years away from heavy metal, which was roughly late 88, 89 till like about 94. So when this stuff was starting to happen, when it was fresh and it was new, I wasn't really listening to metal or really paying attention to what was happening at that moment. The new metal, if you will, not NU, but NEW, the new metal of 1990, 91, 92. I just wasn't listening to it. I was listening to the first wave of grunge. That was about the heaviest stuff that I was listening to at that time. So I never did that whole thing. I never tape traded. I never did that. So by the time I started getting back into metal around 94, 93, 94, I just started picking up where I missed off on some of my legacy bands for me, Priest, Maiden, Sabbath, Dio, and stuff like that. And it really wasn't until probably then, like maybe the late 90s, 98, 99, where I started going back and listening to death metal. But I was never able to fully embrace it. I would go through phases where I would listen to it for a week or two, and then I would just go back to classic sounding metal, what would be the classic bands or bands that had that sound. And what was the reasoning for that? Well, I think part of it was, again, that I missed it when this stuff was brand new. The other thing, and probably the obvious one, and this is the thing that everybody says when you ask people who aren't into extreme metal and death metal why they don't get into it, the vocals are the first thing that comes up. And I've always been somebody that I need to have some degree of melody inside my vocals. And I think that that's why the death metal bands that I do really like early Morbid Angel, Death, even though they're singing in this style, there's still some choruses. You can still pick out things that are like hooks in the songs, in the lyrics and stuff like that. But in the end, the vocals, I can't get past. I can only handle a limited amount of death metal vocals. I just on what's today is Tuesday. Today is Wednesday when I'm recording this, and on Saturday I saw Cannibal Corpse, Obituary. What was the name of that other band? Frozen. Darn it! Really good opening band. I'm surprised I can't remember their name. I'll try to see if it comes to me. And the headliner was Amon Amarth. And I like Cannibal Corpse, but when they were on, especially in a live setting, the vocals were pretty loud, and all you're hearing is just, it's like a jackhammer. There's no variation. There's no melody. Every now and then he does, he goes up and changes it a little bit, but for the most part, it's just jackhammer, one sound, like somebody hitting a piece of sheet metal or something. There's no variation in the pitch, and for me that's very fatiguing. I need melody lines. I need to hear a melody line. And listening to death metal, people are going to hate me saying this, but in some ways it's like listening to rap music where there's no melody, where a guy is just sort of speaking and just there's no melody movement. You could say that, well, that adds to the atmosphere of the music, and I agree with that, and that's why there's certain select cases. Again, I'm going to say Behemoth. I know people are going to tell me Behemoth isn't death metal, but it has this style of vocal, let's put it that way. It has this style of vocal, yet I like it because it very much fits the atmosphere of the music. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Like, for instance, I kind of in a lot of ways skipped over death metal and went right to black metal. And I think the reason why I did that, because you'd say, what's the difference? That's extreme vocals, fast riffing, stuff like that, was because when I started getting back into metal at like 94, I was also getting into doom metal at that same time, and I was really into doom metal. So doom metal has a lot of atmosphere to it, mood setting, cemeteries, graveyards, things like that. And with black metal, I got kind of that same thing. Now musically, they're at opposite ends of the spectrum in the sense that black metal is super fast, doom metal is slow. But for me, what they share is that they share atmosphere. They share some of the same imagery, graveyards, castles, forests, things like that. And so I think that that's why I embraced black metal before got into black metal before I started getting into death metal. In fact, I'm going to correct myself and say that it probably wasn't until the early 2000s that I started getting into going back and listening to death metal. I went with black metal first, like in the mid-late 90s. I can remember reading that famous, what was it in? Was it in Metal Maniacs with the stuff about the church burning and stuff? I remember reading that issue at a Barnes & Noble, and that was something, reading about these guys and everything. And again, coming from doom metal, I think the atmosphere worked for me with black metal. But when it came to death metal, I didn't hear that as much. I didn't hear the atmospheric type of thing. And so I think it was hard for me to get into that. The vocals, all right, I already mentioned the vocals. The other thing, and this could go to really any extreme metal, but it's the lack of variety in the sound. It's just, some of these bands, it's just all about pummeling. It's like right from the first note, it's just a jackhammer. It's just, you read these reviews of these metal bands at the time. I remember I'd look in magazines and there'd be advertisements for these bands. And it's like, this is like getting your head crushed in by a bulldozer, or whatever. Somebody kicking your skull in, that kind of thing. And it was all about being extreme. How extreme can it be? And I don't like that. I need to have variety. And again, I'm not making this connection until I'm making this video right now. I'm realizing that with black metal, you would get these sort of atmospheric, sometimes think about Emperor and those early bands where there'd be some songs that were kind of more atmospheric, where the tempo would drop and you get maybe even sometimes keyboards and stuff like that. But with death metal, at least the stuff I was listening to early on, it was just felt like, and in general, death metal in general. And I think that that's why the bands that I picked, even though people disagreed with me, that some of them are even death metal, like Opeth and Mastodon. I think the reason why those bands appeal to me is there's some variety in their sound. It isn't just one thing all the time. There's different stuff going on, if you will, occasionally. So the vocals, the lack of variety in the sound. The third thing for me is probably the production. A lot of it is lo-fi, harsh sounding production. I mean, you say, well, wait a minute, you're talking about black metal. That stuff is really lo-fi, but it's lo-fi in an atmospheric kind of way. A lot of the lo-fi, and again, I don't go super deep with death metal, so I'm sure that there's stuff that contradicts everything that I'm saying here. But the stuff that I was hearing early on was lo-fi, harsh sounding, but it wasn't in an atmospheric way. So that kind of didn't appeal to me. All right, and the fourth reason why I've never been able to fully embrace death metal, and this factors in a little bit early on, but more so now as I've gotten older, is the lyrics. I don't like gore lyrics. I don't like gore movies. I'm a fan of horror movies, but I'm a fan of more of occult, atmospheric horror movies. And this all makes sense when I tie all this together, right? The lyrics in black metal are more supernatural, occult things for a lot of those bands. The lyrics in death metal tended to be gore, that horror, that splatter gore lyrics and stuff like that. And I just can't get into that. And as I've gotten older, and maybe it's being a dad with kids and stuff like that, and having a daughter and stuff, and I listen to some of these lyrics and I just think like, yeah, I know it's only fantasy. I'm not standing here on a soapbox saying like, oh, they shouldn't, write these lyrics or it's going to cause people to do crazy things. No, I get that. I understand. There's horror movies. This is just, it's fantasy, it's fiction, all that kind of stuff. But just for me personally, I just can't get into these lyrics. Whereas with doom metal and black metal, I could get into the mood and the atmosphere of some of those lyrics. When it comes to death metal in general, I can't get into it. Maybe again, that's why the bands that I do tend to like Death, for instance. Death never did the like over-the-top satanic thing. That's another thing. I don't like the over-the-top satanic thing. I'm contradicting myself when I say I like Behemoth. I know that's a big part of their sound. But for instance, Death never embraced that. And Death's lyrics were always kind of more intelligent than just the, gory, splatter, violent type of lyrics. That's just not my personality. That super uber aggressive, violent thing, that just doesn't appeal to me. I'm more of an atmospheric, moody type of guy, and that reflects in the music that I listen to, and it even reflects in the extreme music that I tend to gravitate towards. So, okay, there you go. There's my, 4 reasons why I've never really been able to fully embrace death metal. Let me know how you guys are out there. I mean, I know that I don't really cover a lot of death metal. Barely any death metal on my channel. And when I do, it tends to not get very many views. And I think that's because a lot of the people that come to the channel are like me. They're more to the classic traditional metal, hard 70s hard rock, stuff like that. That's 99% of what I focus in on this channel here. So I'm guessing that there's other people out there that are like me that can't fully get into death metal. Maybe I'll make a poll and throw a poll up on the channel too to see where people are at with death metal. So I'm curious, what are the reasons why... Maybe the reasons why you love it. Let me know why you're totally into it, or let me know why you've never been able to really totally get into it, or let me know where you stand with it. Are you kind of like me where it's just you get into a mood every now and then, and for a week or two you listen to death metal and then that's it for a couple months? Or, where do you stand? Where do you stand with death metal? Let me know in the comments down below. Till we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.